There's a particular kind of silence that settles over a man who's done things he can't explain to anyone. Not grief, not guilt exactly, something older than both of those. Something that sits behind the eyes and changes the way you look at a room the moment you walk into it. You don't see furniture, you see cover positions, you don't see people. You see potential threats, potential allies, potential complications. You calculate angles, you track exits. You stop being able to turn it off. That was Ray's, the first time I laid eyes on him. I should back up. My name isn't important, but I was working as a junior logistics coordinator for the Compact Transit Authority, the CTA, in the city of Nuvas Horas, which is what we called the human district of the Galactic Compact's North American administrative hub. Nuvas Horas wasn't beautiful, it was functional. Row after row of transit corridors, docking platforms, administrative towers, and transit pens where the ships, the small courier vessels and the mid-range diplomatic shuttles, came and went all day like pigeons around a grain silo. My job was scheduling, getting the right vehicles to the right senators, delegates, and emissaries at the right times, making sure nobody's motorcade crossed paths with somebody else's motorcade, making sure the Veth delegates didn't end up in the same transit lane as the Sorathi ones, because those two species hadn't been on speaking terms for about 600 years, and even accidental proximity made the whole Compact's diplomatic wing nervous. It was not glamorous work, but it was steady, and it kept me close to the machinery of the Compact, which was, at the time, the most important machinery in the known galaxy. 17 species, one fragile agreement, and a city built from scratch in 40 years to house the whole beautiful, terrifying mess of it. I was good at my job, I noticed things. And the thing I noticed about Marcus Reyes, the first morning he came through my intake desk looking for a driver position, was that he walked like every room he'd ever been in had been trying to kill him. He wasn't a big man. That surprised people later when they found out who he was, what he'd been. People always expect that kind of history to come packaged in an obvious body, broad shoulders, scarred face, the kind of jaw you could park a shuttle on. Reyes wasn't any of that. He was medium height, lean in the way that suggests function over aesthetics. Brown skin with the particular weathered quality that comes from a lot of time in environments that don't care about your comfort. Dark eyes. Quiet hands. His hands were the thing I kept coming back to. They were still. Not fidgety, still, the way someone is when they're suppressing nervousness. Genuinely, absolutely still, like they were waiting for instructions that hadn't come yet. He sat across from my intake desk and put a data chip on the surface between us without being asked. Marcus Reyes, he said, here for the ground vehicle operator posting. I picked up the chip, slotted it into my reader. His record pulled up clean. Military background, he'd served in the Terran Defense Corps in what the file listed as a specialized rapid response unit, which was the kind of language that meant something and nothing at the same time. It told you someone had done something significant without telling you what. His discharge was honorable. His health certification was current. His driving qualifications covered every class of vehicle in the CTA's motor pool, including the heavy diplomatic transports that half our senior drivers refused to take, because the control systems interfaced with alien navigation, arrays that made most humans seasick. No infractions, no complaints, 3 years of civilian driving post-discharge, all for private security firms. Everything was in order. I looked up from the reader and found him watching me with the particular quality of attention that made you feel like you were being assessed, rather than waited on. You left private security, I said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Why? The clients, he said, made bad decisions, and I was the one who had to manage the consequences. I thought about that. Then I nodded, because it was a more honest answer than most people gave me. The posting is for ground vehicle operation in the diplomatic circuit, I told him. Primary assignment would be senior-level compact officials. You'd be on call, which means irregular hours. The pay is standard CTA scale, which isn't spectacular. The benefit is you're working within the compact infrastructure, which means good legal protections and access to the cooperative health system. I know, he said. I read the posting. Any questions? One, he said. The senator I'd be assigned to, Vorhin Tal, Sorathi delegation. I paused. You know the assignment already. I did my research. I studied him. The Sarathi were one of the compact's more prominent species, bipedal blue-gray skin with a bioluminescent pattern that ran along their jaw and temple lines, and they were tall, averaging about 2¼ meters. Their political culture was complex, their status hierarchies rigid in ways that often made human staff uncomfortable. Senator Vorhental was one of their senior delegates, a significant figure in the compact's environmental regulatory body. She was also, by reputation, not easy to work for. "She's particular," I said carefully. "I prefer particular," Reyes said. "Particular means consistent." I looked at him for another moment. Then I stamped his file approved and sent it up the chain. I ran into him maybe once a week after that. He'd come through my office for vehicle assignment updates, routing adjustments, schedule coordination. We developed the easy, slightly sideways friendship that people develop when they work in proximity without actually working together. The kind where you joke a little, share coffee, exchange observations about the day, but don't push past the surface. I never pushed past the surface with Reyes, not because he seemed unwilling, exactly, more because there was something in the way he carried himself that suggested the surface was doing a lot of work to keep things comfortable. The way a dam looks calm from outside while holding back enormous weight. Senator Vorhental, for her part, took to him immediately. That surprised people. She had a reputation for cycling through human staff, not through malice, but through the Sarathi habit of expecting everyone around them to operate at their own tempo. Sarathi worked fast, thought fast, expected responses without lag. Most human drivers lasted a few weeks before requesting reassignment, worn down by the pace. Reyes didn't request reassignment. He adapted, not by speeding himself up in some performative way, but by being ready before she needed him to be. The vehicle preheated, the route pre-planned. Coffee, she developed a preference for human coffee, specifically the Sumatran blend from the vendor cart on level 6, waiting in the cup holder when she got in. "Your driver," one of the Sarathi aides told Senator Tal once within my earshot, "is uncanny." "He is precise," she said, in the approving tone that from a Sarathi was basically effusive praise. I mentioned this to Reyes once, the next time I saw him. He shrugged in that small economy of motion way he had. "She has a routine," he said. "I learned the routine. Most people can't keep up with Sarathi tempo. I've kept up with worse." He said it simply without any edge of boasting. Just a fact. I filed it away with the other small things I was accumulating about Marcus Reyes, none of which individually explained the feeling he gave me. The feeling of something vast and carefully contained. About 3 months in, I was working late. System maintenance meant manual scheduling, which meant hours of cross-referencing on actual paper backup forms, which felt like a punishment for living in the future. When the doors to my office opened, and Reyes walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee. He put one in front of me without asking and sat down across from me. "Still running the manual forms?" he asked. "Until 200 at this rate," I said. "What are you doing here this late?" "Senator Tal has an early briefing tomorrow, had to file the route amendments in person." He paused. "The automated system was down." "I know," I said, because I was the one dealing with it. "Sorry." "Don't apologize, you didn't break it." We sat in the small silence that had become comfortable between us. The kind of silence that doesn't need filling. Then I said, without planning to, "Where were you deployed in the Corps?" The silence changed texture slightly, still comfortable but fuller. "Several places," he said. "The perimeter, among others." The perimeter was what people called the frontier zones, the regions at the edge of compact territorial space, where the agreement didn't fully hold, and where the species that hadn't signed the compact occasionally made their positions known through less diplomatic means. It was not a place anyone talked about easily. People who'd been there tended to get a certain quality to their silence when the subject came up, like they were selecting words from a very small pile. Reyes had that quality, but more so. "I don't mean to pry," I said. "You're not prying," he said. "You're curious, that's different." He looked at his coffee cup. "I was with the 9th Rapid Response, Frontier Division." I knew the 9th. Everyone in the CTA knew the 9th, in the same vague, heavy way that you know about a surgical scar on someone's body without having seen it, from the shape it leaves and everything around it. The 9th had been the Corps unit assigned to the Valdres Corridor engagement, 7 years ago. I knew that engagement the way I knew a lot of the perimeter conflicts, through official briefings that were thorough on logistics and carefully silent on the human cost. I didn't say anything. "The senator doesn't know," he said, reading what I wasn't saying. "I didn't put it in the application. The Ninth's records are still restricted anyway." "But you told me." He looked at me then, directly. In that way he had that felt like being measured by something more precise than a ruler. "You're a curious person," he said, "and you've been kind." A pause. It seemed fair. I didn't know what to do with that, so I went back to my forms. But I thought about it for a long time after he left. The thing about the Ninth rapid response, what people didn't talk about in polite company, what only circulated in the kind of whisper networks that exist in any large institution, was that they hadn't just been a conventional military unit. The Valdris Corridor engagement had gone sideways in a way that conventional military doctrine didn't have a category for. The Compact's early warning systems had failed. A perimeter incursion had moved faster than projected and cut off 2 full divisions from their support chain. The situation had cascaded in about 6 hours from tense border situation to diplomatic and tactical catastrophe. What turned it around, what the official briefings called decisive intervention by specialized Terran Defense Corps units, was something that didn't have a clean official name. The soldiers colloquially called them Berserkers. Not the mythological kind. Not quite, but the language fit because whoever had designed the program was clearly familiar with the concept, and because specialized rapid response didn't come close to capturing what they actually were. What they were, as best I understood it from the fragments that circulated in briefings and veteran networks, was human soldiers who had been conditioned, through a combination of pharmacological treatment, neural augmentation, and a training methodology that bordered on the extremes of what any military ethics board would sanction, to function in combat situations without the normal human physiological limiters. Fear, pain, exhaustion, decision paralysis. The Berserkers had all of those responses still in them. They weren't removed. They were suppressed on command, on a hair trigger, for as long as needed, and then they came back all at once in the aftermath like a flood behind a dam that had held just long enough. The results in the field were, the word used in the classified briefings was decisive. In the unofficial accounts that circulated among veterans and their support networks, the word was terrifying. Not because they did anything outside the rules of engagement, but because watching a human stop responding to things that would stop any normal human was, apparently, its own category of unsettling for every species watching. The Valdris Corridor was cleared, the incursion was repelled, the 2 divisions got their support chains back. The Ninth Rapid Response was quietly decommissioned 18 months later. The program officially had been discontinued. Unofficially, as far as anyone knew, there were maybe 24 men and women still living who had gone through it. Ray's, it occurred to me, sitting across from my scheduling desk with a cup of coffee and his terrifyingly still hands, was probably one of them. I didn't bring it up again. It wasn't my place, and more than that, Ray's had given me something by telling me about the Ninth, and I wasn't going to abuse it by pulling the thread further than he'd offered. We kept having our sideways, surface-level friendship. He kept driving Senator Tal. I kept scheduling the diplomatic circuit. Life in Nuva's Horas had its rhythms. The compact administrative cycle ran in 90-day quarters, which meant every 3 months there was a summit period. When all the delegations converged, the transit volume tripled, and my workload felt like it was trying to drown me while also being on fire. We were heading into one of those summit periods when things started to change. The first thing I noticed was the vehicles. Specifically, the security-rated vehicles. The heavy diplomatic transports with the hardened chassis and the anti-intrusion systems. They were getting requested more frequently. Not for Senator Tal specifically, but across the circuit. The requests were coming through on the security escalation channel, which meant they were being driven by threat assessments rather than preference. I flagged it to my supervisor, who told me it was precautionary and related to the summit preparations, and to continue processing the requests without asking further questions. I processed the requests. I kept asking questions internally. The second thing I noticed was the conversations. I don't speak Sarathi, Very few humans do. It's a tonal language that requires a vocal anatomy most humans don't have. But I know what tense looks like in any species. The Sarathi aides were tense. The Veth delegates, when I passed them in the transit corridor, moved differently than they had a month ago, more clustered, more watchful. Even the Lorathi, who were, famously, almost impossible to read, because their emotional expressions were mostly in the UV spectrum, seemed agitated in a way their interpreters were working to smooth over. Something was happening. The third thing I noticed was Ray's. He was the same as always, quiet, precise, professionally invisible in the way of all good drivers. But I'd been watching him for 3 months, and I knew his baseline the way you know the baseline of anything you've paid attention to for long enough. And his baseline had shifted, slightly but unmistakably. He was more alert. Not more tense, more alert. There's a difference. Tension is reactive, scattered. Alertness is organized. His eyes moved differently. The angles he chose when standing still were different. He started choosing positions in rooms that had more wall coverage, more sight lines. He was still doing his job perfectly. Senator Tal noticed nothing, but I noticed. I pulled him aside one morning, while the senator was in a briefing, and he was waiting in the transit bay. "What's happening?" I asked. He looked at me, in general. "Don't." A pause. Then quietly, "There are signals." "What kind?" "The kind that come before something tries to go wrong." I stared at him. "Does the CTA security office know?" "They have their own information," he said. "I don't know how much they're reading." "And you're not going to report your—" I struggled for the word. "Your read." "Who would I report it to?" he said, not bitterly, just as a genuine question. And I realized with a slow and uncomfortable clarity that he was right. What would he say? My training, which was classified and officially discontinued, tells me something is wrong. The CTA security protocols ran through official channels. A diplomatic driver flagging a threat assessment through unofficial instinct was going to get exactly nowhere, possibly worse than nowhere. "Be careful," he told me. "I'm a scheduler," I said. "I know," he said. "Be careful anyway." The summit convened on a Tuesday. 17 delegations, 43 confirmed agenda items, 712 individual transit movements logged in my system for the first 3 days alone. I was running on 4 hours of sleep, and the particular savage energy of someone who has accepted that rest is a memory and caffeine is a personality. Senator Vorhental was scheduled for 2 major sessions per day, the Environmental Regulatory Committee in the morning and the Interspecies Commerce Subcommittee in the afternoon, plus 2 bilateral meetings with the Lorathi delegation, a scheduled address to the compact media liaison pool, and a ceremonial dinner on the summit's 3rd evening. Ray's was at her disposal for all of it. The first 2 days went smoothly, or they appeared to. I was at my desk on the evening of the 2nd day, cross-referencing the next morning's routing when my secondary alert board lit up. Not a full alarm, a low-level notification from the gate security system. A transit authorization request had been flagged as irregular, not denied, just flagged. I pulled it up. The request was for a modification to Senator Tal's morning routing. Instead of the standard Corridor 7 route she'd been using all week, it was requesting a reroute through Corridor 12. The request had come through the Sarathi delegation's own access code, which was legitimate, but the timing was off. 3 a.m. routing changes for a 7 a.m. departure were unusual. I sat with it for a moment. Then I checked Corridor 12. It had been registered as under maintenance for the past 4 days. That was normal. Maintenance cycles were constant in the transit system, and corridors went in and out of rotation regularly. But maintenance work on Corridor 12 was supposed to be complete by end of day today. I checked the maintenance log. The log showed it was still ongoing, extended by request of the facility's management office. I checked which office had made the extension request. It wasn't facilities management. It was a routing code I didn't recognize, a code that wasn't in my system's reference database. I stared at my screen for about 30 seconds. Then I picked up my handheld and called Ray's. He answered on the first ring. 3 a.m. and he answered on the first ring. I didn't find that surprising. "There's a routing change in for tomorrow morning," I said. "Corridor 12. It came through the senator's delegation code, but the maintenance logs don't add up. Silence, then send me the full file. I did. Another silence, longer this time. Don't approve it, he said. I can't just block a delegation request without. Flag it as a system discrepancy. Routing integrity hold. You have the authority to do that. I did, technically. It was a tool meant for genuine system errors. Using it to hold a request while you investigated was in a gray area. And then, I said. Get some sleep, he said. I'll handle the morning. What does that mean? It means I'll handle the morning, he said and hung up. I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk and watched my screens and tried to build a picture from what I had, which wasn't much. A routing change, a maintenance log inconsistency, a code I didn't recognize. Around 4:30, I started running the code through every reference database I had access to. Nothing official. But I had some access to the transit history archives that went back to the compact's construction period, and the code appeared once in a contractor authorization log from 8 years ago. The contractor it referenced had worked on Corridor 12. During construction, they would have known the corridor's layout, its blind spots, its service access points. I was still staring at that when dawn started to gray the windows. Part 2, the morning. 7 a.m. came with the particular efficient energy of a summit day, the transit bays filling up, the diplomatic vehicles lining their launch queues, the air full of the overlapping sounds of 17 different species' morning protocols. Sarathi preferred complete silence before significant meetings. Veth traveled with ambient sound generators that played something between music and sonar. The Lorathi sang, briefly and beautifully, in frequencies that human ears caught only at the edges. Senator Vorhental arrived at Bay 7 at 6:53, precisely on schedule. Her bioluminescent jaw markings, which in Sarathi indicated focus and readiness, were running a clear, steady blue. She was in her formal legislative robes, carrying her briefing materials in the locked case she always used for committee sessions. Reyes had the vehicle waiting. He had it waiting in the position he always used, left of the standard bay marker, angled slightly for a direct departure line, and he was standing at the rear passenger door, not at parade rest, but in that particular quality of ready stillness that I'd come to recognize as his actual rest position. I was in the bay. I'd told myself I was there for a routine system check. That was true in the way that most things you tell yourself at 5:30 a.m. are true. Senator Tal reached the vehicle, nodded to Reyes in the Sarathi way, a brief lateral tilt of the chin, and got in. Reyes closed the door behind her, went to the driver's door, and paused just for half a second with his hand on the door handle. His eyes moved across the bay, not in a scanning way that anyone else would notice, more like a long blink that happened to cover the full 180 degrees of available sightline. Then he looked at me directly across the distance. He gave me the smallest nod. Okay, stay back. Then he got in and the vehicle pulled out. I stood in Bay 7 and felt my heart doing something irregular. I followed on foot to my monitoring station, not because I could do anything from there, but because the routing display showed the vehicle's position in real time, and I was not going to sit in my office staring at scheduling forms. The vehicle took Corridor 7, my rerouting hold it held. Whatever that maintenance code had been planning to do with Corridor 12, the vehicle wasn't in Corridor 12. I watched the tracking dot move steadily toward the summit complex. It was fine, it was going to be fine. The dot stopped moving. Not at the summit complex, not at a scheduled stop, in the middle of Corridor 7 at the junction with Maintenance Access Lane 4. My hands went cold. I checked the system alert. No collision detected, no emergency signal triggered. The vehicle's transponder was still active. It had just stopped. I was reaching for my communicator when the alert board lit up. Not a low-level notification, a full security alert, multiple contact points in the Corridor 7 network. A signal I'd never seen trigger before, the one that meant unauthorized vehicles had entered a restricted transit lane. From the maintenance access, I don't know exactly what happened in those next few minutes, not from direct experience. I know what the security footage showed later, after everything was over and the debrief team spent 3 weeks reconstructing the timeline. I know what the sensor logs said. I know what the witnesses who were at the Corridor 7 Junction maintenance technicians, two compact security officers who had been assigned to a completely separate route, but ended up being close enough to matter, reported. But the clearest account came from Senator Vorhental herself, given 4 days after the event to a compact security board inquiry, and later released in partially redacted form. I'm going to try to tell it as close to that account as I can, with what I know from the other sources filling in the edges. What the senator said was this. The vehicle had stopped suddenly but controlled. She had felt the deceleration smooth, deliberate, not an emergency stop. Reyes' voice had come through the internal speaker. "Senator, we have a situation. Please remain in your seat and stay below the window line." He'd said it with the same tone he used to tell her the coffee was ready. She'd complied. She would say later at the inquiry that the quality of his voice gave her no option to do anything else. It was not a frightened voice, she said in the formal compact translation. It was a certain voice, the voice of someone who has already made all the relevant calculations. She stayed below the window line. She heard things after that. She heard the driver's door open and close. She heard from outside the vehicle what she described as a sound like pressure being released from a system under load. She would come to understand later that this was Reyes' breathing changing. The long, controlled exhale that the Berserker protocols apparently used as the initiation point, the moment the suppressors engaged. She heard voices. Compact standard, heavily accented in a way her translation matrix identified as galactic fringe dialect, the linguistic signature of species and individuals who operated at the outer edges of compact territory, where allegiances were fluid and motivations were commercial. The voices were demanding, procedural, the kind of voices that have rehearsed what they were going to say. She heard the sound of movement, and then she heard something that she struggled to describe adequately to the inquiry board, despite being a skilled political communicator in 3 languages. It was, she said, not what I expected from a human. I have lived in human-adjacent spaces for 11 years. I know what a human sounds like when they are afraid, when they are angry, when they are determined. This was none of those things. This was. She paused at the inquiry, considered her words. This was a system, she said finally, a system that had been activated. The security footage from the Corridor 7 junction showed 5 vehicles coming out of maintenance access lane 4. Not compact standard vehicles, compact registered with legitimate transponder codes, which was how they'd gotten into the access lane using the contractor code from 8 years ago that had apparently never been properly decommissioned. Someone had done their research, finding that old code, understanding how to use it. This had been planned carefully. This had been planned for a long time. 5 vehicles, 11 individuals as the post-event headcount would establish. 11 individuals armed with suppression weapons, the kind that were designed to incapacitate rather than kill, which the debrief teams would later note was either a mercy or a statement of intent depending on how you read the mission profile. They wanted Senator Tal alive. Whatever this was, political kidnapping, leverage, negotiation pressure, they wanted her intact. They had presumably calculated that a compact diplomatic driver would not be a significant obstacle. The footage showed Reyes standing in front of the vehicle's hood. Just standing there. What the footage could not capture, because it was audio stripped for diplomatic privacy purposes, and because the resolution at that distance wasn't fine enough, was the detail of his expression. I've read 3 different witness accounts of his expression from the maintenance technicians who were close enough to see it, and all 3 of them said the same thing in different ways. There was no expression. Not blankness, not the absence of emotion, something more precise than that. His face had the quality of something that had moved past the range where expression was relevant, like a precision instrument that has been calibrated to a task and no longer has any signal to spare for anything outside it. One of the maintenance technicians, a human, a woman named Daniela Marsh who had 15 years of transit work behind her, would tell the debrief team, "I thought something was wrong with him at first, something medical. Because you know how people look when they're scared and trying not to show it. He didn't look like that. He looked like he'd left the building, like whatever was looking out of his eyes wasn't quite." She'd stopped there, started again. "I don't know how to say it right. He was still there. but the part of him that would normally be scared had gone somewhere else. 11 individuals armed against one man in a driver's uniform. What happened next took approximately 4 minutes. The debrief teams, using the footage and the sensor logs and the witness accounts, put together a timeline that covered those 4 minutes in considerable detail. I'm not going to describe it in detail, partly because some of it is still partially redacted, partly because the parts that aren't redacted are not pleasant, not because Reyes did anything outside what any security assessment would call proportionate and justified, given the threat level, but because the way it was done was what the witnesses kept coming back to in their accounts and what they kept struggling to describe. The word that appeared most consistently across the debrief reports, when witnesses were describing what they saw, was methodical. Not brutal, not violent in the spectacular, explosive way that action sequence narratives usually describe. Methodical, systematic. Each problem addressed in order of priority, with an economy of motion that one compact security analyst, reviewing the footage after the fact, described as the most efficient use of physical resources I have seen in any recorded engagement at this scale. 4 minutes, 11 individuals. At the end of it, Reyes was standing in the same spot in front of the vehicle. The 11 individuals were not standing anywhere. They were, to be precise, alive, all of them, and approximately evenly distributed across the junction in various states of incapacitation that the medical teams later cataloged as 4 broken limbs, total. Not per individual. 7 concussions of varying severity, 2 dislocated shoulders, and 11 individuals who would require varying periods of medical care. Nobody was dead. The Compact Security Board would later spend considerable time discussing whether this was the result of explicit intent or fortunate circumstance. The consensus, after reviewing the footage and consulting with several military assessment experts, was intent. He'd known exactly what he was doing, which was, in some ways, the part that the Security Board found most difficult to categorize. When the first Compact security officers arrived at the junction, 4 minutes and 23 seconds after the initial alert, which was a fast response for the summit period, they found the following: 5 unauthorized vehicles, disabled, 3 with what appeared to be manual damage to their drive systems, 2 simply blocked by the geometry of their own parking. 11 individuals incapacitated. Senator Vorhental, in the passenger compartment of her vehicle, having followed Reyes's instruction to the letter. She was below the window line, sitting on the floor of the passenger compartment, with the calm of someone who had decided to trust completely and was following through on that decision. And Marcus Reyes, standing in front of the vehicle. The security officers would report that when they arrived, he was standing completely still, and that their first assessment before they processed the scene around him was that he was injured, because of how still he was. It took them a moment, they said, to understand that the stillness was deliberate. He'd been standing there for approximately 40 seconds before they arrived, having already moved through the entirety of what he'd done and arrived at the other side of it, waiting. One of the officers, a Sarathi, tall even by Sarathi standards, name of Korath Ves, would tell the debrief team, "I have been in security operations for 22 years. I have attended the aftermath of engagements at every scale this compact has experienced. I know what someone looks like when they are coming down from an adrenaline response. This man was not having an adrenaline response, or if he was, it had ended before we arrived, and what I was looking at was the other side of it." He paused in the debrief, then added quietly, he looked tired, not physically tired. Something deeper. The dam, I thought later, reading those accounts, the flood coming back. Reyes looked at the security officers when they approached, identified himself, gave his employment number and his assignment code without being asked. Then he said, in the simple, direct way he had, "The vehicle's occupant is uninjured. There are 11 individuals requiring medical attention. They should be processed as potential adversarial agents, and their transit credentials should be treated as compromised." Then he asked, "Is the Senator's committee session still on schedule?" The Sarathi security officer, Korath Ves, stared at him. "We'll need to assess the situation before." "She has a committee session," Reyes said, with the particular patient quality of someone explaining something obvious. "She shouldn't be late." Korath Ves said to the debrief team, "I didn't know what to do with that." Part 3 after. Senator Vorhental gave her testimony to the inquiry 4 days after the event, but she'd asked to speak with Reyes before the inquiry convened. The meeting took place in a compact administrative conference room, neutral ground, with a language interpretation unit present. I know this because I was peripherally involved in the logistics of setting it up. The senator's office had made the request through the CTA, and the CTA had asked me to coordinate because I was the one who'd been managing Reyes' assignment. I wasn't in the room for the meeting, but I spoke to Reyes afterward in the hallway while the senator was still meeting with the inquiry's preliminary staff. He looked the same as he always looked. This is important because 4 days had passed, and I'd spent 3 of them essentially unable to eat properly while thinking about what had happened, and he looked exactly the same as he'd looked every other morning he'd walked through my office. I said, "How are you?" He said, "Fine." I looked at him. He modified this to functional, which was from him a more honest answer. "She wanted to see you," I said. "She had questions," he said. "That's reasonable." "What did she ask?" He was quiet for a moment. Then she asked me what I was. The way he said it, not who but what, made something in me go very quiet. "What did you tell her?" "The truth," he said. "The relevant parts of it." "How did she respond?" He looked out the window at the end of the hallway. The window faced the transit bay, and we could see the morning's vehicles moving through their routes, the ordinary machinery of the diplomatic world going about its ordinary business. "She was quiet for a long time," he said. "Then she said," he paused. "She said it in Sarathi, so I'm working from the interpreter's translation. She said, 'You protected me without any instruction to do so beyond the basic terms of your employment.' And I said yes, that was accurate. And she said," he looked back from the window, and there was something in his expression that I hadn't seen before, not visible, not overt, but there in the way that things are there in him. Contained, careful, something that mattered. She said, "Why?" I waited. And I said, "Because it was my job, and because you trusted me to do it." The hallway was quiet. "Is that the whole answer?" I asked. He thought about it. He thought about it for longer than he usually thought about things, which, given his normal processing speed, meant it was a significant pause. "No," he said finally, "but it's the true part." The inquiry took 3 weeks. During that time, Reyes was on administrative hold, standard procedure when any CTA employee was involved in a security incident. He came in for his debrief sessions. He cooperated completely. He answered every question with the same direct economy he'd have used to explain a routing change. The thing that the inquiry spent the most time on, more than the identities of the 11 individuals, who turned out to be a freelance operation, hired through channels that took the Compact's counterintelligence people months to fully trace, by a political faction within one of the non-signatory species that wanted a significant vote in the Environmental Committee to go a different direction, was Reyes himself. Specifically, his background. The 9th Rapid Response files were still restricted. The Inquiry Board had to petition 3 separate Terran Defense Corps offices to get clearance for the relevant portions. What they got back, in the opinion of the Compact security legal analysts who had to parse it, was enough to answer the factual questions and not nearly enough to answer the larger ones. What they concluded officially was that Reyes had acted within the scope of his employment, had used proportionate force, had protected his assigned charge, and had not violated any Compact law or CTA policy. What they noted, in a separate internal memorandum that I was not supposed to see, but that found its way to me through the particular porous membrane of bureaucratic information management. The individual's capacities exceed the standard parameters of civilian employment. It is recommended that the Transit Authority's security protocols be revised to account for the possibility that individuals with non-standard military conditioning histories may be present in civilian driver and escort roles. It was the most carefully bureaucratic way I had ever seen anyone write we did not know what we had. Senator Vorhental made a specific request at the conclusion of the inquiry. She requested that Marcus Reyes be reinstated to his position as her assigned ground vehicle operator. The CTA's security board debated this for 4 days. The argument against was the liability question. Did they want an employee with a classified military history in a civilian role that had now proven to involve active security threats? The argument for was a good deal simpler. He had done his job, he had done it without any human casualties, and he had done it in a way that protected the diplomatic process rather than disrupting it. The argument for won. He was reinstated. I happened to be at the coordination desk when Senator Tal's first scheduled session post-inquiry came through, a morning committee meeting, standard routing, Corridor 7. Her preference, apparently, even after everything. Reyes arrived at Base 7 6 minutes before the senator, as he always did, prepped the vehicle, set the coffee in the cup holder. The senator arrived. She walked to the vehicle. She stopped beside it, looking at him in the direct way Sarathi have that always seems like an assessment even when it isn't. He opened the passenger door. She said something in Sarathi. I was too far away to hear it, and I don't speak Sarathi anyway, but I saw it. He looked at her, something shifted in his expression, not much, just enough. And he nodded once in the small, precise way he had. She got in. He closed the door, walked to the driver's side, got in. The vehicle pulled out of Base 7 and into Corridor 7, steady and on schedule. I asked him weeks later what she had said, that morning in the bay. He thought about it for a moment, then. She said, I know what you are now, and it does not change what you are to me. I didn't say anything for a while. Then I said, what did that mean to you? He was quiet. He looked at his coffee cup, in the way he sometimes did when he was sorting through something that didn't sort easily. I was in the program for 4 years, he said. Not all of it was, the program itself was not a kind thing. It did what it was designed to do. But when it was finished, the decommission process was, he stopped, started again. When they stopped running the program, they didn't really know what to do with us, the people who'd made it. They'd solved the problem they were trying to solve, and then the problem went away and the solution was still there, still walking around. I nodded. Nobody knew what we were, he said. After, we knew how to be soldiers. We knew the parameters of the thing that had been done to us. But the compact wanted the perimeter stable, and stability didn't need berserkers anymore. It needed, he paused, drivers, administrators, people who would fit into the ordinary structure. And you do fit, I said. Mostly, he said. But not entirely. Not entirely, he agreed. You can't entirely, he stopped again, then simply, it's there, it's always going to be there, I just choose what I do with it. Does she understand that? He looked at me. She said she did, he said, and she keeps asking me to drive her places. He said it in the flat, matter-of-fact way he said most things, but there was something underneath it that wasn't flat at all. Something that had been kept very carefully contained for a very long time, and was allowing itself, in this small, specific way, to take up a little more space. I said, good. He said, yeah. Part 4, what came after? The 11 individuals connected to the ambush were prosecuted under compact law. It took about 18 months for the full process to work through, the compact's legal system being what it is, which is the product of 17 species trying to agree on what justice looks like. The political faction that had hired them was publicly named and formally censured. 2 of their representatives were removed from their advisory positions in the outer territories. The vote in the Environmental Committee, the one they'd been trying to influence, went through. Senator Tal had been the deciding voice on the water rights provision for 3 of the compact's contested resource zones. The provision passed. I've been told, by people who know more about compact environmental policy than I do, that the provision has been significant, that the water rights framework it established has prevented at least 2 territorial disputes from escalating, that it is, in the language of the policy people, one of those quiet structural things that matters enormously and gets none of the attention. I think about that sometimes. The way one woman's vote, protected by one man standing in a corridor, changed what happened to 3 planets' worth of water. Nobody made a story out of it. Reyes drove for Senator Tal for another 4 years. I stayed at the CTA for 3 of those years, and then moved to a different position within the compact administrative structure, interspecies coordination, which is even more chaotic than transit scheduling, but has better coffee. Before I left, I had one more real conversation with Reyes. Not the sideways, surface-level kind. The kind that felt like the surface was finally thin enough to see through. He came to my office, not for a scheduling matter, just to say goodbye. He brought coffee. We sat across from each other in the same configuration we'd used 100 times. "You're going to miss the Corridor 7 routing," I said. "I'll find other corridors," he said. "Are you going to keep doing this, driving?" He thought about it. "For now," he said. "It suits. Because the senator trusts you." "Because," he said, and paused and actually smiled, just slightly, the particular small and genuine smile that I'd seen maybe 4 times in 3 years of knowing him. "There are always problems to solve, and I appear to be good at solving problems." "You are," I said. "You flagged the routing anomaly," he said. "I would have found it, but you found it first." It was from him about as close to effusive as it got. I felt disproportionately pleased. "We solved it together," I said. He inclined his head fractionally, an acknowledgement. Then he stood and picked up his coffee, and we walked to the door. Before he left, he said, "The thing she said about knowing what I am." I remembered. I think he paused, considered. I think most of my life I was afraid that was a reason people would leave, if they knew. I looked at him, and I said. He looked back at me with those dark, still eyes that had always seen more than they let on, and said, "And I was wrong, apparently." Then he nodded once and left. Part 5, the Senator's Account. The following is Senator Vorhintal's account, as given to the Compact Historical Documentary Project, 11 years after the Corridor 7 incident. Translated from formal Sarathi diplomatic register. I have been asked many times, since the events of that summit period, what I felt when I understood what was happening. I want to answer this honestly, because I think the honest answer is more instructive than the political one. I was afraid. I was on the floor of my vehicle, below the window line, and I was afraid. I am a Sarathi senator with 30 years of political experience, and I have been in difficult situations before, and I know fear when I am feeling it. I was feeling it very clearly. What changed very quickly in those first few moments was not that the fear went away. It was that I understood from the sound of things outside that someone was handling the situation, and the specific someone was someone I had come to trust over the preceding months, not because I had decided to trust him, but because he had been consistently trustworthy, day after day, in every small way. And when the large moment came, the trust was already there, built from all the small things, and I did not have to decide to extend it in that moment. It was already extended. I did not know when I hired him what his history was. He had not disclosed it. I do not fault him for this. What he had been was classified, and more than that, it was a thing that, as I came to understand it, he carried very carefully, the way you carry something that has sharp edges. Not because he was ashamed, because he was precise. When he told me after the inquiry what he had been, the program, the Berserker conditioning, all of it, I spent a long time in silence. He waited. I was silent because I was trying to place this information alongside what I already knew of him. And the thing I kept finding was that nothing needed to be revised. Everything I had observed about him, his precision, his economy, his carefulness with other people's safety and comfort, these were not facades over something different. They were the same thing in different registers. The large version and the small version were consistent. That is rarer than people acknowledge. I asked him when the silence had run its length, "Does it trouble you, what you carry?" And he thought about it, with the particular quality of thought he had that meant he was not going to offer me an easy answer, just the true one. He said, some days more than others, the day it happened afterward, yes, more than usual. I asked why. He said, because when I'm in it, I'm not in it. And then I come back, and I have to count what I did. Count it. Check that I did what I meant to do, he said, that the two things match. I looked at him. This quiet man in a driver's uniform who had, 4 days earlier, stopped 11 armed individuals without killing any of them, while I was sitting on the floor of my vehicle listening to things I did not fully understand. I said, did they match? He said, yes. I believed him, not because I am naive, but because I have, in 30 years of political work, developed a tolerance for the difference between people who tell you true things and people who tell you comfortable things. He was telling me a true thing, and the effort behind it. The effort of going back to count, to verify, to make sure the person he believed himself to be and the thing he had done were the same. That effort was visible to me. He made that effort every time. He did not have to. Nobody was auditing him. The conditioning did not require him to audit himself. But he did it because, and this is what I came to understand about him over the years we worked together, he had decided at some point that the thing inside him would be used on his terms or not at all. That is not a small decision. I think of him sometimes when I am in the committee chambers and the vote is difficult and the stakes are high and the various forces at work are doing their best to move things in directions I do not believe are right. I think of him standing in that corridor, very still, with no expression, having already made all the relevant calculations. He was not afraid of what he was. He had decided what to do with it. There are worse things to take with you into a difficult room. End of Senator Vorhintal's account. Epilogue, what I know now. I heard from Reyes one more time after I left the CTA. It was a message, brief, through the standard compact communication network. No preamble, just. Senator Tal's water provision is in the review period for Zone 3. Her office says the outcome looks good. Thought you might want to know. Then, I've been assigned to a Lorathi delegation for the past year. The singing is an acquired taste. I'm acquiring it. Then, hope you're well. I wrote back and told him I was well, that I was glad about the water provision, that I hoped the Lorathi singing grew on him. I didn't hear from him again after that. But I think about him sometimes, about that particular kind of person, the kind who carries something enormous with the kind of care that makes it invisible until the moment it's needed, and then uses it with the kind of precision that leaves the damage exactly where it needs to be and nowhere else. There are stories about the Berserkers. Most of them are wrong in the ways that stories about soldiers are usually wrong. Too much spectacle, not enough precision. They imagine something violent and explosive because that's what the surface of the thing looked like from the outside. They don't imagine a man who preheats the vehicle and puts the coffee in the right cup holder and knows the route before you ask for it, and stands very still in a corridor and makes sure, when it's over, that what he did and what he meant to do are the same thing. They don't imagine someone choosing, every day, what to do with what they are. They should, because that is the harder thing, the braver thing. The thing that doesn't make a good story because it happens in quiet, in the space between the large moments, in the years and years of ordinary mornings when nothing happens, and you make the same choice again anyway. To be what you are, to be careful with it, to use it for the right things. The galaxy is full of large weapons. The rarest thing in my experience is a precise one. Marcus Reyes was precise.